Hey, welcome to Merricks Garage Metal episode! So it's not exactly what you might have been thinking. We're going to talk about different types of metals, where they belong in your truck, and why. Metal is a broad term that covers pretty much anything from titanium to aluminum to beryllium to all these different things in between. This video, we're going to focus on steel. Now, steel is a man-made substance. It's a man-made substance of essentially iron and carbon. And how you mix that iron and carbon composition together gives you different properties. You can add other things in like molybdenum, moly something. You can add that in. You can add in ceramics, you can add in all kinds of stuff to get different compositions of metal. Now, each one of those metals will have a specific job that it is good at. Some are incredibly brittle, but they're incredibly hard. Some are very strong, but they don't have a very good yield strength. Some are very ductile, but they do not have very good torsional stability. Now, steel is what we're going to focus on today. And steel, believe it or not, is a man-made product. You have iron, which is what you pull out of the ground and you mine and refine. And then you add in various other things to get it to have the characteristics that you want for the specific application. You have some metal that you want in forgings. You have some metal that you want in very, very hard applications like drill bits and things like that. You've got other metals that are going to be very, very brittle, but they're going to have a massive hardness scale. And then you've got other metals that you want to have some ductility so they can absorb without deforming and fracturing. So for all sake and purpose, we're going to focus specifically on today axle shafts, because it may just look like a flat bar of metal, but there's so much that goes into that flat bar, because if you think about it, all of the power that your engine is putting out that is being either magnified or reduced through the gearbox and the transfer case and the differential, that power has to be transferred down an axle shaft to rotate that wheel. You have something that has too much elasticity to it, and you're just going to wind this thing up without transferring any torque to the wheel. You have something that's too hard, and it won't be able to absorb any sudden energy spikes resulting in direct contact with the ground through torque application, but it's going to shatter and fracture and be useless in a real-world scenario. With that said, let's jump into the 5 characteristics that are important when discussing metal or steel. So here you can see the 5 aspects that we're going to be looking at. The hardness of the metal, the brittleness of the metal, the malleability, the ductility, and the toughness. The hardness, as the hardness goes up, the strength also goes up. The brittleness is poor shock absorbing characteristics. Basically, the more brittle of a piece of metal you have, the less it's going to be able to absorb any shock loads. The malleability, that's the opposite of brittleness. It's going to be something that is able to be more conforming and flowable to a certain degree. As the malleability goes up, the strength goes down though. So you can already see how there's going to be like a yin and yang with the brittleness and malleability. Similarly to the ductility and hard toughness scale. Ductility is the ability of the metal to be stretched and deformed. As the ductility goes up, the strength goes down though. And finally, you have the toughness. How it responds to stress. Will it deform before it fractures? Obviously, if you have something that's fracturing into a ton of pieces, you have something that's going to be brittle. Now, each one of these is going to have a benefit and a drawback. You don't want to have something that has total hardness but is unable to adapt to certain shock loads. Now there are applications that are not encountering any of those shock loads. Frame, for example, or a roll cage, or a dash, or something that isn't going to be under constant stress and load. Then you've got other aspects that are going to be under a tremendous amount of load. Your ring and pinion, your axle shafts, your U-joints, your yokes, your carrier, anything that is transferring torque, force, load has to have a blend of all these characteristics that's best suited for the application that it's going to be in. Well, axle shafts are a perfect example. These are required to be very, very strong, very, very load deflecting, and very, very hard. You have something obviously that's going to be soft and the splines won't engage, they'll just strip off. You have something that's too malleable and it's going to store energy instead of transferring it down to the wheel. So this is one of the stub shafts from the Yukon axles that I received. This is a 4340 chromoly axle. Chromoly is what everyone talks about, like, oh, you got to get chromo axles. Well, all chromoly is a blended steel. It's going to be a combination at varying proportions of chromium and nickel and palladium and various other compounds or minerals that go into giving it the characteristics that it needs. I don't know enough about all the metallurgy to get into what exactly the proportions are, but suffice it to say, the guys over at Yukon do. Let's get down to talking about the splines. Higher the spline count, theoretically, the stronger it's going to be. There is going to be diminishing returns when you start getting too many splines on too small of a surface. But essentially, the physics behind splines, you're distributing the force or load across a more surface area as you increase your spline count. Okay, so we've established that there are various types of metals, and steel is one of those. But when it comes down to various chromoly steels, the numbers that you're always going to see are going to be like a 4140 or a 4330 or something like that. The 4 is going to designate that you've got a chromoly blend, which is going to be chromium, nickel, palladium, and iron, in obviously different varying compositions. The attractiveness of the chromoly, specifically for driveline components, is you're able to craft that cocktail of elements to come up with something that's going to give you good hardness, that's going to give you good ductility, and it's going to give you good strength. It's important to consider too that in addition to having the metal itself, how you treat it, how you refine it, how you process it, all goes into how that metal is going to perform in the real world. There's many ways of hardening a metal after you have formed it. You can do it by quenching it, you can do it with electricity. And hardening is going to give you a metal that will perform at a higher level than something that hasn't been hardened. Using that cocktail of elements combined with using different hardening techniques, you can create an axle shaft that is strong and hard, yet ductile still, so that it doesn't shock load all the additional components attached to it, like hubs and drivelines and differentials. It will absorb sudden torque spikes without fracturing or breaking. And that is a very important attribute for an axle shaft, and it's why I went with the 4340 Yukon axle shafts. And I can't wait to get them in there. And I'm sure you guys are excited for me to start using my hands again instead of just talking at you constantly. So tune in, hit that subscribe button, give me a comment, tell your friends, because the good stuff is coming. Merricks Garage. I'll see you next time.